So our channel is designed to teach you everything about Lightroom and editing photo and video, from the basics to the most advanced. And we're gonna start with the basics of Lightroom today. Lightroom is the Adobe program that, there's also Photoshop, but Lightroom is the one that's really dedicated to light, color, just really the basics of photos, but you can use it on a very expert level as well. We're gonna start with the most basic things that it has, just basically taking you through what it has to offer, how to import your photos, and really just to get started and kind of get your bearings in the program. Some of these can look a little bit intimidating if you've never used them before, the programs that fall in the Adobe suite. But I promise you they're a lot less intimidating than they look. It's just kind of getting used to it and figuring out where things are. So I'm gonna show you where everything is. If you've not already imported photos into Lightroom, this would be a good time to go ahead and do that. I'll show you really quick in case you don't know how, but if you already know how and you don't have any in there, just go ahead and load some in so that you can kind of follow me along as we go through the rest of the video. If you have the normal default layout, and you can see my screen here, I just opened Adobe Lightroom and I already have a bunch of albums on the side, but I'm gonna start a new one so you can see. If you open up Lightroom, this is the default layout, or it should default to this layout, I should say. There's albums on the left-hand side, a lot of editing tools on the right-hand side, and then at the bottom, you'll see the photos that are actually in the album that you're currently in. So, to get started, click on Add Photos in the top left-hand side of the screen, and you can import them from anywhere. I'm gonna show you how to do this. I'm not gonna actually do it. Ours will be coming from a server, and it's just a lot to navigate. So go ahead and grab photos from your desktop or wherever you have them saved and import them. So when you're importing your photos, if you're importing them from a camera and you've been dabbling with using a professional camera, there's probably two file types that are coming through: JPEG files and ARW files, or files that end in ARW. We call them raw files. You can import either one of those. If you really are looking to get into the intricacies that Lightroom has to offer, use the ARW files, the raw ones. The reason I say that is just because they're a larger file size, and although they look a little bit flatter or duller than your JPEGs when you're just going through the previews and looking at them, they actually are shot like that and do allow for more editing and tweaks. There's more information in that file, so you can manipulate colors and lighting better than you can with a JPEG. If you only have JPEG files, no worries. They're plenty big enough and high quality enough most of the time to use in Lightroom. So once you pick the photos that you want in, just go ahead and import them. Again, I'm faking this part. I already have the photos that I want to teach you guys with, so I'm going to skip this part. But if you wanted to download or import multiple files, just click on the top one, hold Shift, click on the bottom one so that you can get everything in between, and then hit Review for import. Once you do that, a screen will pop up that shows you all of the different files that you want to import. If there's any you didn't mean to import at that point, just unclick them, uncheck them, and then go ahead and hit Done or Import. So once those pop up, you can import them straight to an album. If you didn't do that and you need to add them to an album now, you'll see the plus sign over here on the left-hand side of the screen underneath Albums. Go ahead and hit just plus sign and Create Album. You can type in the album name. Let's just call this one Test Photos. Create. So again, here's my Test Photos album down here. I'm not gonna use that one because I had already made an album for today. So mine's under Lightroom Tutorials right here. I just picked a variety of photos, and if you didn't do that when you first imported, it might be good to go ahead and pause the video and upload some other photos now. I'm just gonna show you what I decided to import. I did this so that I had a variety. So I picked a headshot of one of my close friends who's also a client. The background was a little bit dark. I had enough light to light her for this photo, but it was a very impromptu photo shoot, so the background wasn't lit as I would like it to be, but I can fix that in Lightroom. So I picked that one because later on we'll get into the more detailed in one of the next videos about masking and changing the background without changing the actual subject of the photo. I also picked some things with a lot of color. You'll see this is a photo from a Nike shoot. There's this huge mural on the wall and all these different rainbow type colors. That's really good for messing with the color capabilities that Lightroom has, so just good to kind of have in your test album. This was a photo that was taken outside. There's the original right there. Again, lots of graffiti, lots of color. I loved the blue in this photo. It's kind of this tealish blue, but I thought about making it into a more retro type blue. So I was also thinking about mainly using the color tools later down the line. So that's why I picked that one. It's also great to pick some test photos that are outside, either architectural or pictures taken in nature. The reason I say that is because they have a ton of texture and detail oftentimes. So whether you're taking a picture, you have a picture of a field and you've got grass and flowers, or the ocean with the waves, or big rocks. These, for example, were taken in Ireland. So you'll see this old structure, kind of castle-like structure, tons of details that we can bring out that way. There's also this old architecture of this beautiful building. Again, really, really good for testing out certain effects and detail-related capabilities that Lightroom has. So all that to say, just pick a variety of photos when you are creating your test album so that you really give yourself some good stuff to work with and kind of discover everything that the program has to offer. So there's my test album. I'm looking at them in this particular view right now, but I can also touch this grid view button so that I can see everything I have in the album. Don't pay too close of attention to what my album looks like. You're gonna see some that look edited and some that are raw. That's because that is what it is. I have the raw one in there and also the final product, so I can show you where we're headed before we even start going there. But you will see I have the variety in here. Lots of nature pics, made sure to include some people, since a lot of people are looking to edit pictures of themselves or somebody else for Instagram. So that's kind of my variety. So you'll notice I picked the grid view that particular time because I needed to see everything in my album. Now I'm going to show you the actual effects and the basics and everything Lightroom has inside of the program, but in order to do that, I need to be in detail view. How you do that is on the right-hand side, you'll see this particular icon that says Edit. If you click on that, you'll see a notification pop up that says the edit controls are only available in detail view. Fine, because there's a button right here that says Switch to Detail. Click on that. Okay, I'm gonna start by just exploring these things while we look at this architectural photo that was taken in Ireland. You'll see on the right-hand side, the edit at the very top means you're in that right view. You are in details view and you're now capable to make edits because you've gotten out of that grid view mode. Some of these modes at the bottom, you'll see there's all these different squares, and I have a little train on my mouse to help you follow where the mouse is. But these are made to see the photos that you have, not to actually edit them. This one icon that's just details view is what allowed me to get to this edit screen. So that's what you're seeing in the top right. The very, very top there's three options only. It's auto, black and white, that's what B&W is, and H&R, or HDR, sorry. So if you click on auto, this is the AI attempt to edit the photo. This will shock you sometimes. It is pretty good. You'll also put it on photos sometimes and realize that's not at all what you were going for. But for beginners, it's really good jumping off point, because sometimes if it's really hard for you to spot what's wrong with the photo, auto can sometimes help you get there. And it will actually show you what it did to the photo. So when we get into the different columns, like light, color, effects, and detail, all of that, you'll actually see, if you hit auto, what it did to the photo. So it's not just like a blanket button, it's actually going to move those dials for you in the light and effects and color columns, so you can kind of get an idea of what they did, or what AI did to help you get there, if that makes sense. So for this particular photo, auto did a great job, actually. It made my blues bluer in the sky. I think it upped some texture and detail. I can't tell. I'll find that out when I get into it. And then lighting wise, it adjusted highlights for me, shadows for me, brought blacks down, whites up. It just kind of knew how to get me there. So this is a really good jumping off point. But I'm gonna go ahead and take it off since we're gonna try to do some of this from scratch. So I took off the auto. You'll see it's just a lot more muted. The clouds it's a little bit harder to see exactly what the clouds look like, where the clouds stop and the sky starts, just because the blue is so light in this photo that it's borderline getting close to being white. There's just that black and white option. If you need that, it's there. I don't really use this black and white very much. I think you normally need like a lot more detail to your photo before you throw it in black and white, because it just doesn't pop and have the contrast it needs to. So that's there if you ever need a really quick fix for black and white, but it's not how I would normally use the black and white feature. And then you'll see this high dynamic range button. I'll read you exactly what it says here. and you can read it on the screen too. Edit, display, and save photos in high dynamic range. Experience increased depth and realism with brighter highlights, deeper shadows, improved tonal separation, and more vivid colors. It wants you to take a tour. We'll do that in a different video, but I'm not gonna go too deep into HDR right now. I just don't need that. And I don't think it's something that you'll use that often. Okay, so let's move down to the actual different columns under here. The first one being exposure, or they think of highlights, they think of white, bright. Those actually aren't the exact same as whites in this particular context. They do different things. And then contrast, shadows, and blacks are what we associate with those darker photos. These particular effects won't necessarily just make the photo darker. There's really strategic ways that you can use them that can be really helpful. So let's just explore these different options. So exposure, I tell people with exposure, people tend to take exposure up really high really quickly. It basically just turns your photo all the way to white. It will, what we call, blow out the photo so fast. So I kind of tell everyone to take a chill pill when they're using exposure. A little bit goes a very long way, but it's just a good way to bring up like the overall light that the photo has. But I'm talking like 0.02, 0.03 when you're using exposure. Again, a little bit goes a long way. You'll see when I bring the exposure all the way up, this photo basically just looks like a very bright white light. It is extremely bright. And the exposure all the way down makes it very, very dark. So I don't actually need any exposure on this particular photo. It was very bright that day, so I'm not gonna use it. I normally do use exposure a little bit, but I'm not gonna do that right now. Contrast is something that we probably would use on this particular photo. I'm just gonna kind of show you what it does. I'm not gonna go into all the details of getting this photo perfect, but you'll just see when you pull contrast up, the darks do get darker. You see a lot more differentiation in these lines where you see the sun's hitting this side of the building and it's really bright versus the front of it was more in the shade and it's really dark. And pulling the contrast up just exacerbates the difference between those two. Pulling the contrast down, basically, it just feels like someone kind of sucked the life out of the photo. Contrast coming down can be great when there's harsh shadows on someone's face, or your photo was just like a little bit overexposed on one side and underexposed on the other. So let's bring our contrast kind of back to the middle so we can explore highlights. So here, if I pull the highlights up, you'll see most of what's being affected when I pull highlights up in this particular photo is the clouds. Those clouds are the whitest thing in the photo. So bringing highlights up is bringing the whites are getting whiter, and just everything that's on the high end of the photo is getting higher. If I pulled highlights all the way down, it doesn't do much besides it really creates a little bit more of a differentiation between the blue sky and the clouds. So pulling the highlights down in this particular photo actually does help me, because the sky was so light blue that day that it actually was closer to the cloud color than I would have liked it to be. So I'll leave the highlights partially down just for the sake of going through this, but that's how that works. Pulling shadows all the way up or all the way down is gonna, in this particular case, because there's a lot of black and whites in this, it's gonna look like a more extreme version of the contrast feature, but opposite. When I'm pulling the shadows out, the photo gets lighter. It's taking those really dark hues, those shadows, those things that lie on the darker side of the color spectrum or the light spectrum away. So this is, again, it kind of looks like these buildings just have a lot less depth than they actually do, because there's a lot more black in these particular buildings, because you can see that they're old and they've got kind of this like moldy feature to them. It's kind of a gross word, but I don't know what else to call it. Just this kind of like rotting feature on this old building. When I pull the shadows down, all those dark hues go with it. So what happened in this particular case is that we lost a ton of detail, because the intricacy of this building lied in the contrast between the lighter parts of the stone and the darker parts. So just so you can see, shadows all the way down, those pillars or those buildings get really dark, and then all the way up it just looks like, again, someone kind of sucked the life out of them. So let's end up back in the middle. And then here's the whites. Pulling the whites all the way up is taking not only the whites that you see in the building a little bit up, but the sky is just totally blown out. That can be really useful if you don't want to bring the whole exposure, the exposure of the entire photo up, but you do want to emphasize some of those lighter parts of the picture. Whites is a really good tool, and it's a lot more forgiving than pumping up the exposure. So it's a good option to have. I use the white and black manipulation in these photos all the time. Then here's what the black feature does. If I pull it all the way up, again, for this particular one, it's mimicking, it's doing almost exactly what the shadows feature did. Not quite, but very, very close. It's just kind of taking those black areas of the photos and just lifting that black and making it less extreme. In this particular case, kind of making the buildings themselves look more muted. And then if you pull the blacks all the way down, again, it's same thing. For this particular photo, moving the blacks down and the shadows down is creating a similar effect. They kind of look the same, but it won't be the case on every photo. These effects look different in all different types of photos, all different types of lighting. So just because one doesn't work for one particular photo does not mean that it's not gonna work for other photos. Okay, so that gets us through the light column of Lightroom. Now you just kind of know what they do. You know, exposures, highlights, and whites are kind of bringing your photo up and making them lighter, and contrast shadows and blacks are bringing the overall lighting in the photo down. However, they all do different things. So even if in this particular case, the shadows and the blacks, bringing those down kind of did the same thing, that does not mean it would be the case for every photo. So it's just learning how to use these, and a lot of this is trial and error. Even when you get really good at editing photos, you know, we try and tweak things all the time in our settings. So you'll also notice something on here called curve. We're not gonna do that today because I think it might make a beginner want to quit Lightroom. It's extremely confusing and can be really intimidating. So we're gonna save that for a different video and move on to the color column, which is also on the right-hand side underneath light. So go ahead and minimize that light column to get it out of the way so you can see what you're doing and you have more room to work with, and we'll get to the color column. You'll see the very first thing is white balance. You can do this a couple different ways. One would be the eyedropper. So if you hit the eyedropper on the side, you can pick something in your photo that you know is true white and click it. That way it gets an idea of, oh, okay, that should be my gauge for white throughout the photo, and it'll use AI and technology to get you there. So that's one way to do it. So I just clicked the middle of the cloud because I knew that was white and it was supposed to be white. However, sometimes if your whites are a little bit overexposed, it's going to be less likely to pick up the rest of the whites in your photo that aren't as bright as the clouds. So that way doesn't always work, but it does work sometimes. Another way is to use this drop-down menu. It'll default to a custom one, it'll default to a setting called as shot. So it'll just basically be the white balance. When you shot the photo, or whoever shot the photo shot it, that's what their white balance is set to. So that's what this looks like in this particular picture. My whole picture is a little bit on the cooler side, but it's not far off from where it needs to be. I can also go to auto. So that is Lightroom's attempt at white balancing it with AI. Theirs a little bit warmer than mine. I'd argue that either one is fine. They're both pretty close to true white. And then you can also see these other options that are in here that we'll just scroll through. They've got daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, and custom. I find myself not using these very much, but if you're just really struggling with a photo and you're just trying to get there, it's not bad to just kind of sift through these and see if one looks closer to being right than what you currently have. So that was white balance. The next section in this color column is temperature, and there's a slider that ranges from blues to yellows. In video and photos, those two are normally on opposite sides, even though technically blue and orange are crossed from each other on the normal color wheel as complementary colors. They're considered opposites for the purpose of editing photos. So you can see if I drag the slider from the middle area where it started all the way down towards blues, it really just makes the entire photo blue. If you drag them up towards yellows, it just really makes everything super, super warm. If one of those two looks more natural on this photo, it'd be pulling it towards yellows because the building is already kind of like aged and dated. But you never really pull these to either extreme in any situation. You're just using them a little bit normally to get your whites right. you'll be able to begin to spot when white is true white versus when it looks pink or green or yellow or blue. Now that sounds kind of crazy, and when you first start, if you're sitting with a photo editor editing a photo, they would say, oh, your whites look yellow. You're gonna say the white looks like white, but your eye will begin to be trained to where you can spot it, and you'll know if it looks a little bit yellow, you can pull it towards blue to kind of compensate for that. Tint is essentially the same concept, except on opposite sides of that tint spectrum are greens and pinks. So this is what happens, just always the best way to learn is just to do it to the most extreme version. If I pull it towards pinks, the whole picture really gets pink. Pull it towards greens, whole picture gets green. Again, that's not something that you use in extreme doses almost ever. There's times where if you're in a room, lighting can look very yellow and you might have to pull it a lot towards blue to compensate, but those are really just to help balance your picture back out. They're not really intended to use in super extreme amounts on any photo. Just so you can get an example of kind of what that looks like, I'm gonna pick one of these photos, which is a portrait of my friend Savannah, and I'm gonna actually edit that one because I did notice there were some greens in that particular photo, kind of like the blonde in her hair was skewing green, the background of the wall behind her was skewing a little bit green. You may look at it and say it looks like a white wall and a blonde person, and it does, but when I start to pull towards pinks, you'll notice how much green was really in that picture that maybe your eye didn't notice before. So here's the picture I'm gonna use. You can see I'm looking at her blonde. Blondes are is a really reflective hair color, and most blondes like to look actually blonde. So blonde's not gonna wanna look her hair to look more yellow or green than it actually is, which is fair. So in this particular situation, I can eyeball this and say this looks a little bit green, maybe some yellows, and that her hair looks a little bit green. When I start pulling my tint towards pink, you'll begin to realize how much green was there that you didn't even really notice. So let's turn that off and look at it again. So I just hold down this eyeball so I can take it back to the original and then pull it back off. You can see her blondes are much truer now and the wall behind her is actually white. Again, this photo isn't actually edited fully, so it doesn't have the exposure and the other settings on it that we would normally do to edit the photo, but I just thought it'd be a good one to show you what it looks like when things are skewing a little bit green and how you can use that tint slider to fix it. Then vibrance is the next effect on this particular color column. Vibrance, if you pull it all the way down, is going to look like a black and white photo for the most part. It's not true black and white. There's still some hues in here that aren't completely on that black or white scale. But if you pull vibrance all the way down, basically it takes the life out of your picture. Vibrance pulled up more can just kind of accentuate the colors that you already have in your photo. So you'll see here, when the original photo, you probably didn't even really notice that the tops of those buildings have a lot of green to them. When you pull the vibrance up, you'll immediately realize oh wow, there's a lot of green hues in the tops of those buildings. It just can bring your photo to life. It's also really easy to overdo it on vibrance, but not nearly as easy to overdo it as it is on saturation. Vibrance, I would say, especially when there's people in the photos, is a much better way to bring life back into people if you don't know how to do those really intricate edits on people and skin tone. Vibrance is a much better way to do it than saturation. A lot of times I'll see people coming in or I'll see people upping the saturation on their photo, and that's when you get into oompa loompa territory, for lack of a better way to say it. If you see someone and you're like, they're too orange in their picture, it could possibly be that they drug their saturation up too much. So it can really be a useful tool, but it is very easy to overuse it. So just be careful with that one. Same thing with saturation. When you pull it all the way down, it's gonna look close to black and white. And if you pump it all the way up, it's just gonna bring a lot of life to those colors. We don't have any people in this picture, so it doesn't do anything too crazy. Normally I would never be able to bring a picture up to 60 and saturation and even be able to look at it without cringing. But this is just a building, so for architectural photos, you have a little bit more leeway on using that. Next, you have the color mixer. This is one of my favorite tools in Lightroom. I use it all the time. There's gonna be another video for this as well, just because there are a lot of things that you can do with this particular tool. So I'm just gonna graze the surface of what you can do with it. So if you wanna move into that color mixer video, once you kind of got the hang of this, that would be a really good jumping off point. This is a good jumping off point for that. So much you can do with that, and it's just too long to put in this video, so we'll make another one for that. So what the color mixer defaults to just the color setting. That's the only thing I'm even going to dabble with right now as we go through this very abbreviated version. What you'll see is that there's all of the different colors in the rainbow, and then an extra or two. And they have, for each one, they have hue, saturation, and luminance. I have the blues selected right now just because that's what the sky is in the photo, and that's a huge part of this photo. So I thought it would be easier for you to see an example of how this works using that. The hue is going to take us to either color on each side of blue. So if I pull the hue down, it's going to take me towards teals. And if I pull and like an aqua color, if I pull the hue up, it's going to take me more towards that purple pink family. People have used this to change the color of people's clothing. Sometimes it works like that, sometimes it doesn't. But for this particular case, if I pulled it towards all the way to the left, you'll see that those blues are going to aqua. This would be a good way to get a photo to look kind of vintagey and retro, is those blues go more towards aquas rather than that true blue. But you can see if I pull it all the way up, they go towards pink and purple because those are the colors on either side of blue in the color wheel. For saturation, if I take saturation all the way down, it basically pulls the blues out of the photo. So there will be no more blues. That's what saturation's doing when you pull it all the way out. You're telling the computer, if you see blue, I want it gone, if you pull it all the way down. If you pull it all the way up, it's the exact opposite. It's super, super exaggerating the blues in your photos. For this particular picture, it's pretty cool because the sky being all the way blue looks really good. But in some cases, pulling saturation all the way up on any color is gonna look insane. So I will leave some saturation on because I like the way it made the picture look. And then luminance is basically you're telling the color how dark or light to be. So if you pull luminance all the way up to the right, like I'm doing here, it's basically taking that color and pushing it towards white, for lack of a better word. Essentially, it kind of removed the background in my photo because the only color in the background of the photo was the sky, which was blue, besides white. So it just basically looked like it removed the background. It could be useful for something. There's also other ways to remove the background, but this is actually a pretty forgiving way in this particular circumstance. If I put the luminance all the way to the left, it is making my color look a lot more dramatic because it is darkening those blues. So my blues started out pretty light, and then pulling towards luminance makes them super, super dark. All the way down on luminance, you'll start to see there kind of be lines around the edges of things. I really don't think this is a slider that you would particularly pull all the way one way or the other, but it's really good for making colors look a little bit more dramatic, if that's what you're going for. So that's the basics of the color column in Lightroom. I don't want to go into too much more detail than that because I think it's a really good stopping place just to know what they do. Again, the best way to figure out what something does is to put a photo in there and to pull those sliders to the most extreme, all the way up and all the way down. Of course, you're never going to leave it like that for the actual edit, but it's a good way to just know what it does. The next column in Lightroom is called the effects column. So if you want to go ahead and minimize your color column down, open up your effects column and you're going to see 5 different sliders here. One for texture, one for clarity, one for grain, one for vignette, and one for dehaze. The first slider is texture. So let's just do exactly what I just said. Pull it all the way up to see the most dramatic version. When the texture slider is at 100, this is what these buildings look like. You'll just see all those little minute details, the lines between the bricks, the spots on the building, those moldy parts that we keep calling them. Those are just all really, really exacerbated. For architectural photos, you're going to use texture a lot because that's one of the coolest things about these photos is that you can see how the buildings age and you can see all of the detail in like the brickwork and all of that. So we won't go all the way up, but I'll leave some texture on so you can see. Then if you pull texture all the way down, you'll notice the buildings just go and they're very, very smooth. I am going to use the same photo throughout this whole tutorial and I'll show you some other examples at the end, just because I want you to see how all these effects work on the same picture. Bringing texture down of an architectural photo would probably not happen very much. This is more something that you could use if someone's skin was not doing exactly what you wanted it to do and you wanted it to look more smooth and finished. On this particular photo, it's great to see what it does, but it does not look natural in an architectural photo at all. Put that back where it goes. Also, when you're pulling these sliders, if you ever are trying to get back to 0 and you can't quite get there, you can click the little number next to texture and type in a 0 and hit enter. You can really type in any number that's on that scale. So that's an option if you want to change it that way. Clarity is another slider that is in this effects column. I was trying to think about exactly how I wanted to describe it. I call it kind of the drama effect. It really does emphasize texture, but it also emphasizes lights and darks. I oftentimes use it for clothing related things. For this, for example, I will switch to this picture for a second. If I pull clarity all the way up, you see all the definition it gives to her jacket. This Dodgers jacket she's wearing, you can see all like the nooks and crannies and the reflections. It makes it look a lot more dramatic. It also did stuff to her face that I wouldn't want it to do. So that'd probably be something that I used actually as a mask on her jacket if I was gonna use it. But again, that's for a different day. But let's go back to our architectural photo for a second. Pulling clarity all the way down, it does kind of look like there's just this misty, almost white, transparent layer over the top. It kind of blurs details, almost makes it look fake and just really white and washed out. Pulling it all the way up again is like, it's kind of like the texture feature, but like a lot more dramatic. This is something that I would use for architectural photos, but I would be really careful using clarity if you have someone's face in it, because it can really create extremes that you don't want. Dehaze is a feature that going all the way up, it does make it more dramatic, and pulling it all the way down basically blows out the photo. I'm not gonna lie, I don't use dehaze very much at all. Some photographers use it, some editors use it, and to each their own. What you'll find as you really get into this industry and doing this is there's multiple different ways to get where you want to go. For me, dehaze ain't it, so I don't really use it. The vignette effect is exactly what you would think it would be. If you pull it all the way down, it's going to give you a black vignette around the sides, kind of this like oval shape that only comes in from the corners. Most people know what a vignette looks like, and pulling the vignette all the way to the right is going to give it that white effect in each of the corners. It almost looks like those old school oval portraits that you see of people from way back in the day, where the sides are kind of hazy and light. That's what the vignette does. That would be in very particular situations you'd use the vignette. I don't use that in normal photo editing almost ever. It's normally for something dramatic or for a specific purpose. Then grain is exactly what it sounds like it is. It makes your photo look grainy. Sometimes people use this to make their photos look more vintage. I find myself not using it very often just because we're taking such high quality photos that I really want them to look as high quality as they are. But this can be really useful if you love a photo and it's not quite usable. Maybe you took it on your iPhone in bad lighting and you want a retro look. It can almost make photos that aren't the highest quality look intentionally retro sometimes. So that would be an occasion I would use it mainly, but grain is not something as a photographer that I really capitalize on very much. But if you like the look, go for it. The next column that we have is the detail column, and for this one, we're not gonna go into too much about these particular effects, but I'm just gonna show you what it offers. So in the detail column, you'll see a slider that says sharpening. That can be really good if you feel like you got most of the photo in focus, but maybe you missed something, or maybe you were just on the edge of having the photo in focus, but not quite. Sharpening can really help with that. So just know that's there if you need it, and you can dig into more details in one of our other videos. This AI-related denoise feature can be really helpful in certain scenarios. This is AI's attempt to get out that what they call noise in photography. And you can basically think about it as the visual version of that same white noise. If you've ever, been sitting in class and listening to that air conditioner behind you, or if you've ever had a video and you kind of hear like static, maybe the sound isn't that high quality and you kind of hear some static in the background, or a radio station that you tune to, it's the visual version of that. It's just kind of like messy noise. And so if you want to get it out, this denoise AI feature can really help with that. Let's give it a try. So I hit denoise and it's asking me the amount I want to use on denoise. It defaults to 50%, so I'm just going to follow their default suggestion. And then you can hit enhance. It'll tell you about how long it expects to take. It's not immediate. You could just watch your little blue wheel over here on the side. Okay, I'm really trying to see what it did. I used it, not gonna lie, in this particular scenario, I didn't see it do that much, but if I was looking at someone's face really close up or something that wasn't an architectural building with a bunch of sky, I would notice it a lot more. So just know that that's there and then dig into some specific education about how that works for particular photos, but I just don't wanna load this down so much that we don't get through it. Adobe's really good about asking you for feedback, especially on these AI features that are newer. Don't be afraid to use that. In fact, you should. It's asking you, like, how did this work for you? Or do you wish that you had gotten a different result? Was this the result you're looking for? Fill that out because your program can get to know you and the overall AI technology can get better. So definitely use that because it's useful. It's useful for them to make changes and upgrade technology the way that the user needs it to be upgraded. Optics is the last column in this edit section. It's right below detail. So go ahead and close up your detail column and open up the optics column. When I say I'm going to breeze through this, I'm going to breeze through this. This is stuff for later down the line. You're not going to need it right now unless you're really getting into the depths of deep in the depths of editing, which is not really what this tutorial is for. So we will make sure that we do a video on that as well. Let me figure out what I can do in this photo to actually make it to where I can show you what these optics tools do. If I hit this remove chromatic aberration button right here, nothing really happens to my photo. So I need to edit my photo in a way to where I actually need help fixing that. So let me see what I can do. Okay, so I went into the blues and actually tried to mess my photo up to where I would get some of this halo type line around the side of the building so that I could actually use that tool, that monochromatic aberration tool, can't even remember the name of it, that I could actually use that to show you what it does. So I needed to make this photo really dramatic in order to give myself that kind of halo type line outside the building. I'm gonna zoom in so you can see what I mean. Command plus will get you there. And then you can actually just click on the photo and drag it so that you can see. Zoom in. Okay, I'm gonna zoom all the way in. You'll see this halo type line around the side. So what I did to get that was I pulled the luminance all the way down on my blues because I know the contrast between the building and the sky would be so ridiculous that it would cause a problem. So now I'm gonna go back down to this remove monochromatic aberration around the side. I don't know what the word aberration actually means. I probably should. All I know is that it kind of helps fix a halo when there's like a stark difference in color up next to an object or a person. So I'm gonna hit the remove chromatic aberration button. Oh, look, it's gonna tell me what it means. It says reduces color fringing most commonly found around bright lights and sharp edges. Use the remove chromatic aberration option to remove color fringing caused by lenses. That's the phrase I was looking for, color fringing. So you'll see that mine does have exactly what they're talking about. It's got that kind of stark difference between the sky and the building. I'm gonna hit remove chromatic aberration. And you'll see those little tiny white lines that were right around the building. It kind of removed those to create less contrast. You have to really be looking to see that work. Again, know it's there. It's something to look up in a different tutorial, but we don't need it right now. Same thing with this enable lens correction, not for today's tutorial. But just wanted you to know it was in the optics column itself. Okay, so that's the basics of Lightroom. Now you know all of the things that are in the program for the most part, especially in this edit column. We didn't get into masking or cropping or anything like that. We're saving that for a different video. But now you know most of those editing categories, at least what's in them and potentially how to use them. You can always go back and rewatch the particular sections if you need help on one in particular, whether it be light, color, or effects. Make sure you tune into our channel if you want to learn more. We'll always be posting educational videos, not just about photography, but also about the entire Adobe suite, how to use camera, lighting, how to use Adobe Premiere, Photoshop, tips and tricks. So anything educational in the photo, video, audio space, you can find on our channel as we continue to grow it. So just be on the lookout for those. We'll also link anything else that you need in the show notes and in the details. And always feel free to reach out to us or follow us on Instagram at The Cast Collective.